Low visibility in spots due to some dense morning fog.
Tonight we've got fog along the river, which is being impacted not only by the fog that still seems to be fairly dense at this hour.
Outside Heathrow Airport, the air traffic control tower is barely visible. Emerging from the fog, this plane is one of the flights that made it.
For the last 7 days, the world has been shrouded in a veil of mystery. An unrelenting fog that stretches from the poop-covered streets of Portland, Oregon, to the quietest corners of the countryside. This is no ordinary weather phenomenon. It's a dense, suffocating mist.
This is big breaking news. Multiple states around the country are reporting a very dense fog, and some people are even saying it smells like, quote, chemicals. People are getting sick.
Yep, these are real signs that are marking a dangerous turn for our planet, as the fog might have just turned into a deadly bioweapon that has now completely spread through our planet. People were terrified after reports of an eerie, thick fog completely blanketing almost every continent on our planet, with reports of the fog not just staying there for over 5 days, but allegedly burning people's noses, throats, and eyes. Haunting footage shows not only one woman after getting her car washed, seeing black film on the car after just leaving it there from the fog.
And I don't know if anybody else has noticed, but if you've got a white car, the fucking car doesn't stay white for any longer than a day. Right, look at all this.
Well, hello guys, David Vose here. Oh man, it's a beautiful day here, and I've been talking about how we've had such beautiful weather, no storms, no snow, no rain for a couple, 3 months. I don't know how long. Well, now I'm wondering if all of this weather is just hanging over there in the Midwest and the East Coast, because we're not getting any of it over here. But if you look at that, you think, well, that's snow day. That's a picture of snow. It's winter. But that's in Florida. I don't know if that was really snow or not. You would think the person who was shining his flashlight would have said, hey, that's not snow. I don't know. I'm just a messenger. But it does seem that a lot of people are reporting something unusual. I don't know if that snow in Florida is unusual. That's unusual, but I don't know if that has anything to do with this fog. But what it does have to do with, or what it seems to have something to do with, is something I want to talk about today. Something that happened called the Great Bubonic Plague, or the Black Death, that swept through Europe in around 1347, 1348, or whatever, and just seemed to wipe out half of Europe. At least a third, by some estimations. And they happen to all be these Waldensian, Albigensian, Mary Magdalene Christians that came up from Marseille, France, and were wiped out Inquisition after another. And then, voila, what the Inquisitions and the sword couldn't get. It appears either coincidentally or by the fate of the deities above, that as soon as they stopped the Inquisition, they went through with a plague. The Waldensian Inquisition was in 1100 and something. Then there were more roots routing them out. They were leaving the area of France to go to Spain, and later they had the Spanish Inquisition, drove them further. But in 348, they had this deadly plague that just wiped them all out, man, woman, and child. And it's a little bit coinkydinky for me, which I don't believe, as you know, coinkydinks. And the fact that at the time, everybody gave their eyewitness testimony that they saw these Jesuit priests with black robes, what they thought was a sigh, could have been a hose in a tank or something. They would hear this whoosh, and when these Jesuit priests with black robes showed up to your town and sprayed the town square, everybody in that city died next day. Let me share with you a couple of things that I found on the internet. The Meuse Valley fog. The 1930 Meuse Valley fog between 1st of December and the 5th. Well, that's just about the same time it's happening over here. In the year 2024, killed 63 people in Belgium owing to a combination of industrial air pollution and localized weather inversion. What are these words? I've never heard of weather inversions. What are they coming up with these words? Localized weather inversion and industrial air pollution. I think I've heard of that one. The river Meuse flows from France through Belgium and the Netherlands before entering the North Sea. Oh, it was like tracked? It was like moving? Like the monster from the sea or something? The area in the Meuse Valley where the incident occurred between the cities of Yeah, well, that city up there called and Leg, with another bunch of letters that we're not sure which way they're pronounced because it could be a G, a J, a H. And centered, we have a lot of weird, things are kind of strange. It's very obvious that all of our languages, English, French, German, whatever, Russian, they're all combinations of some ancient language that's all mixed up now. We don't even know how to talk. It's like some of us started living in the inner cities and just paraphrasing our words and turning other words like cool into hot and neat into not neat or whatever. But it centered around the town of Ingus, was densely populated, and had 27 factories. These factories produced zinc, steel, fertilizer, and explosives, amongst many other products. This was added to by large numbers of coal and wood heaters burning during the unseasonably cold weather. There were several thousand cases of illness over the week, and the 63 deaths occurred at the same time, with the first death occurring on the 3rd of December. 56 of the deaths were to the east of Ingus. Oh, the east of Ingus, on Golden Pond. The main symptom was dyspnea. Oh, the dyspnea symptoms. Shortness of breath. And the average age of those who died was 62, over a range of ages from 20 to 89 years. The youngest, why do we need to know all their ages? 20-year-old woman named Louise Dames. That Dames Louise died walking home from a party and may have had undiagnosed asthma that contributed to her death. Well, I wonder who wrote that in the autopsy. Cattle in the area were also affected. Well, now, it's got to be a conspiracy. Kaj Roholm, Danish scientist and the world's leading authority on fluorine. Huh? The leading authority on fluorine? Now, why would you want to make that your life, like, goal of knowing everything about fluorine? Is it because you're about to start putting it in our water at that time? And he determined that it was the fluorine gas from the nearby factories that was the killer. Oh, fluorine, that stuff we put in the water and everybody's drinking it. Like, we got immune to that. We drink that like it's pure water over here. Like, we love fluorine. Give us some more, man. Some chlorine too. And some arsenic. We've gotten immune to all that. From the nearby factories, that was the killer. The exact date of this disaster is unknown. A statue and a plaque commemorating those who died were inaugurated in Ingus on the 2nd of December 2000, due to a similar, albeit less severe, incident that occurred in a nearby valley in 1911 that killed off many cattle, many farmers in the Meuse Valley. Fled to the hillsides during the first 2 days of the smog, reduced livestock casualties, and likely saving the lives of several farmers as well. But of course, that was in 1930, and then they were talking about 1911. But let's go back a ways. The Grim Reaper is a figure that represents death. Is often depicted with I think it's supposed to be pronounced scythe, but I've always say a sigh. I don't think most people even know how to pronounce that word, but I've ever heard people saying sigh. But when I say it, it's like coming from my subconscious. I'm not really sure, maybe because I haven't used the word very often. I think I just call it a sickle or a big knife. But yeah, it's strange that there are certain words that I just don't have a clue how to pronounce. There's very few of them. I can pronounce really big ecclesiastical sounding biblical words, but this word here, sigh, I've always pronounced it sigh, and I just looked it up and it's scythe. You do pronounce the at the end. So, my bad. But anyway, the Grim Reaper's imagery may have come from the Black Death, a pandemic that killed an estimated 1/3 of Europe's population in the 14th century. I read it could have been half. The sigh is a symbol of death, reaping souls, similar to how a peasant harvests corn in the field. So why did this come from the Black Death? See, they don't explain to you here, but it's because people saw a man with a black robe and what they thought might have been a sigh, and they heard some psst, psst sounds like they were spraying something. And whenever this man would come with the black robe and this long hose with a sprayer on the end, that they didn't know what it was, but it sounded like he was cutting grass or whoosh, whoosh, so it was a black robe and a sigh. Like, very strange combination. They had black-robed priests in those days. Jesuits, maybe they were, they came in like judges with black robes. They were the inquisitors. They would ask questions, and if you didn't have the right answers, they'd use the sigh to cut your head off. But it seems like half the world died in this plague. And it was described as though something was being sprayed on their porch or somewhere at the town square. And then this black-robed sigh guy would leave and the whole town would just perish once he came in and sprayed something. Let me show you that. So I remember some years ago, I could look up, probably even in a dictionary or an encyclopedia, and, because the internet hasn't been here that long, but probably the last 20 years or whatever it's been that I've been looking this kind of thing up, I would always go right straight to articles that would explain how the Grim Reaper literally started in the 1348 or whatever with this Black Death, the bubonic plague, the Great Plague or whatever that wiped out. It used to be like 200 million people, most of over half the population of Europe. Now they're like, oh, how silly, you silly people. It wasn't that many. It was only 50 million. Okay. So what? Only a third of the population. You silly people. Don't exaggerate. Well, there are a lot of scholars or historians that still maintain that it was probably about half of Europe or more that died. What people don't know is the truth about history. 1348, this was during the Holy Roman Empire, when they were still trying to decimate and destroy the teachings of Jesus Christ through the 72 that came over on the boat to Marseille, France. And so it was in the area of France where this Waldensian persecution, Inquisition, the first Catholic Inquisition, there were two major Inquisitions. The Waldensian, which is the French Inquisition, and the Spanish Inquisition. Well, it started with the French because when they went in, they started murdering them, and millions of people were perishing because they believed in Jesus and not the Pope. And they were following Peter Waldo or Pierre Valdez, however his name has come down to us from whatever particular language, because if it was German, they would say Percy Vox. And so when it went to England, those individuals who spelled their name Vox, Vaux, they changed the spelling when they went to England to Vause, Vause. And when they came to Boston, they changed it to Vose. So these actually, I can trace my lineage back to Peter Valdo. And the word Vose originally just meant val or vale or valley. They were the valley people or the Christians who were in the valley. In some of the romance novels, he was the lineal descendant of the Round Table, King Arthur. He was the great prince. Well, this great prince is the child of Mary Magdalene and Jesus Christ, the lineal descendant of Jesus that reigned there in Europe when the Holy Roman Empire tried to exterminate true Christians. The Bogomiles, right? The Cathars. They were also called Waldensians because this meant the valley, the Walde, or the valley. And then there were the Albigensians, which were the people in the Alps. So it was a designation, a geographical designation. The people in the Alps were in Italy, northern Italy and southern Germany and in the Swiss Alps. And these individuals were hiding there from persecution. And they were the original Christians there in Italy. There in France, where Marseille, France, was the place where Mary Magdalene landed on the boat. Now, her sister Martha, history says, went with another group of individuals, and they went to the Alps. So all over in this area were these true Christians. And when the Holy Roman Empire began, it was an infusion of Goths from the north coming down into Italy to take it over. The Lombards swept through and took it over. They were taking over true Christians, Martha and Mary and her descendants. So by the time of like 1100, they started this Waldensian Inquisition, the people of the valley. And then there was the Albigensian persecution, which is the people in the mountains. And they drove them out. Most of them went to Spain. And for a while they got away. And then they, years later, did the Spanish Inquisition to move them out further. They murdered millions of them. And remember that the Waldensian Inquisition was somewhere in the 1100s, 1150 or something. The Spanish Inquisition was like 1470 by, Ferdinand II of Aragon and his wife, Queen Isabella. They finally conquered the Moors and took Spain because they were harboring these Christians. Muslims and Christians were living together in peace in Spain. It was lovely. And this is where we got a lot of enlightenment. And this is why we have Kabbalah, because these ancient traditions. But when the Germanic Goths came in, they infiltrated it and started writing it down with these other Ashkenazis, and they started infiltrating and corrupting. That's how they always do. But remember, the 1470s, wasn't it 1492 that Columbus sailed the ocean blue and took a lot of these original Jewish people from Mary Magdalene and took them to America. So you hear a lot of names, and it's hard to know whether Columbus was more likely the Ashkenazis that was brought in there and took a group of his Jewish brethren and formed the chief surnames in Spain and other places. So today you've got these names like Rodriguez and Garcia, and these were names that came from Spain and were Jewish bloodlines. And if you go to Spain, and guarantee I know about this because I was for a while married to the cartel's wife who fled because he had all these other women, and she was just a trophy wife, and she didn't like the way she was treated. She fled Mexico. I know you guys are not going to believe this, but this is true. and ended up across the border into New Mexico. I ended up meeting her. We got married. Her ex was the general in the army in Mexico and head of the cartel. So what I ain't going to go into the whole story, but what I'm telling you is the history that I heard from her and her mother. They're very wealthy individuals. They have one of these Jewish names. They're very, very light-skinned. They're not the peasants that lived in Mexico when they got there. These are the royal bloodlines that came over there and reigned over Mexico for years. I'm well aware of it. They run the military. And in fact, not but just a few, I don't know, 2, 3 months ago, one of these individual Bavarians from some other country, wasn't even born in Mexico, ended up becoming the president of Mexico. It's quite easy for them to run this underground mafia there, as they do wherever they take control. When they came to America, the good guys got here first and created a constitution, which has been a prick in their side for a long, long time. But we're talking about over there in France. And so after the initial war where they murdered them in inquisitions, many of them were just left. They went to Breton, which is connected to the word Britain, because the original people of Britain were held up there as well. But these were the original descendants of Mary Magdalene, basically. They called it Plymouth Rock. And Scotland, this is where we get the Scottish rite of the Knights Templars, which came from Mary Magdalene. Don't confuse that with the Bavarian Illuminati in 1776 that then began to infiltrate these individuals after they were driving them out to Scotland. The York Rite, which is up there, which was the Gothic takeover, the Bavarian takeover of the Knights Templars, they had a plan to put everyone on earth in these mystery rites, turn them upside down, and rather than to reveal the truth to truth seekers, to be initiated into the truth, they used it as a way to only initiate those that they chose at the top with the knowledge. And the umbrella would encompass all the peasants and they would all be under oath. So they created all these 33 degrees. And this is a good point to mention here. We were talking the other day about these teachings, these sacred secretion teachings, and the pineal gland and all this business. Well, one of the things we were saying is it doesn't come directly from Kabbalism, but it doesn't really come from any spiritual tradition because it was made up 100 years ago or something by some guy that wrote a book. And Santos Bonacci started reading it, and Joshua started reading the book or hearing it secondhand from somebody. And they're promoting this and saying it's in the Bible. Well, one of the reasons you can tell it's not, these terms aren't in the Bible, but they claim that it's esoterically in there. Well, one of these esoteric points is these 33 vertebrae. And they claim it has to do with this 33rd degree. And that Jesus was 33 when he died. Well, we don't know for sure Jesus was 33 when he died. But we can count a number of vertebrae that are 33, although there are other vertebrae that could make it longer. It depends on where you want to count. I guess when you're young, you do have 33 vertebrae, but as you get older, the sacrum or the coccyx bones fuse together, you really only have 24 vertebrae. 24 seems possibly the number we ought to use because the 24 elders that are around the throne of deity. However, that's not what we're talking about here today. But this word 33 came about with Kabbalists. So it does relate to Kabbalism in the tree of life and the 32 points of light or the 32 ways of wisdom. And they add another one because of there was originally 32 degrees, but then this 33rd degree was created as the one degree that rules them all or something. So it's really maybe 32 in the esoteric wisdom. And that might throw a kink in the theory that your 33 vertebrae represents this 32 ways of wisdom on the tree of life, not 33. So it isn't exactly squaring, the compass here. But yeah, this does have to do with Kabbalism. Now, remember, Kabbalism and what took over these ancient esoteric truths that came down through Mary Magdalene and the 72 that arrived in France on a boat. They had esoteric truth. They had priests. They knew the esoteric meaning of the scriptures. But there's no record that they wrote a Kabbalah. That was something that others did. Some Talmudic individuals, they didn't mention Jesus. If this had started with the followers of Mary Magdalene, they would have talked about Jesus because they were Christians and they worshiped the Heavenly Father and the Divine Mother, and they knew all these truths. So they would have mentioned it. But they did have a lot of secrecy and illusions and secrets. And one was this symbol of the 32 ways of wisdom and these 32 points on this tree of life. So this is coming from this Talmudic Judaism, which is a distortion because they invented the 33 degrees. There weren't 33 degrees of initiation in Jesus' organization, I guarantee you that. You simply believed upon the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, and he healed you, and he loved you, and they took you in, and all you had to do was live with your brothers and sisters, forgiving and loving and sharing as a brotherhood. You were taught meanings of the scriptures, esoteric meanings, and there were other rites and ceremonies that go back to John. But Jesus and Christianity wasn't about these ceremonies. It was about unveiling all these rituals and ceremonies that the church had done in temples. But we no longer need a temple, probably because he knew that at that point we would be scattered into all the world and we would need true spirit and truth, right? We wouldn't be dealing with building Gothic temples. We'd be, trying to learn. But at this point, we were going to practice salvation. We were going to start loving one another and caring for one another, and not just reading about symbols that told us to do the very thing that we're now being tasked to do, which is love and forgive our persecutors and try to preach the gospel to every soul on earth. But the church that Jesus established never had any degrees. The early church didn't come up with some crazy organization where people could be initiated and lied to and strung along and abused and never really told the truth, but just put under subjection. It wasn't some phony thing. That's the 33 degrees that we have today, which people down at the bottom get the first, second, third, fourth, fifth degree. They don't know what they're doing. They have no idea. They're being promised 72 virgins and a life of eternal bliss, but they have no idea what they're doing. They're just being put under oath so they can never tell what they see, and they can be told, well, don't worry, the upper echelon of the group, they know everything, they're loved, they know what they're doing, just trust the game, and once you consent, then you're under oath, and if you try to tell anybody what's going on, they will kill you. So they drove them out. Now, the ones that they couldn't get, look, going from house to house, murdering people with weapons. They didn't have really guns. They were using swords and just, taking armies coming in, taking certain ones to a court. And, it was supposed to be legal. They found them guilty of heresy and hung them on crosses and stakes, and the other peasants would leave. So they drove them out and they'd just go somewhere else, a lot of them. Some of them died. Their priests, their elders, their papas and mamas were drug out in town squares and burned in piles, and it was public executions. So most people just left, and they ended up going further and further west to Spain, and then finally to Britain and Scotland, and then to America. And then when they got to America, they made a constitution where everybody could be free. But on their tails was this New York, right? The New York rights coming down. They killed the prophet Joseph Smith, and they started what we call Mormons, and they put them out west and took over with a secret organization the whole western part of the United States, building these Gothic structures like there you see in Salt Lake City. So the people that just tried to pretend that they were going to keep their nose clean and hunker down and stay where they were because they couldn't travel because they had children. So they just harbored these beliefs against the church. They tried to stay in Europe. There were still people who knew the truth, who didn't believe in the Catholics and what they were doing. And they knew, many of them in those days, but it's not being told today, that it was a faction of Bavarians that were following Judaism. We'll just put it that way. We've talked about this many times. These individuals took power through the banking system. It was a particular family. We'll call it the Rothschild family. And they began to have a great deal of power by lending money to kings and queens and sleeping with them and taking over their bloodlines. It just took years and years. But as time went on, in about 1340, there were all these people left. And they were tired. They didn't want to keep murdering them with swords. And it got to the point where nobody believed in their episcopal rules and their edicts. They thought it was a farce. They didn't believe they're going to go to hell for disobeying. They just tried to stay away from the ruthless law and dungeons and the screws and the torture. So they got them with the Black Plague. And you could go into the history books 10 years ago or on Google and look it up, and they would tell you about the Grim Reaper, that it was first seen there in 1348, that when he would come to your town, he would swing his scythe or the hose would squirt something out, and the whole town would be dead by morning. And everybody saw the Grim Reaper. He was a black-robed priest with a hose in his hand. And of course, the religious started painting this scene, and they didn't know what a hose was, and they didn't know how to understand the guy with the black robe, because everybody knew that was the Catholic Jesuits. So they didn't try to hide that. They just put the Jesuit priest in the picture, and when he came to town, you were all gone. So they did inquisitions, and after that, they mopped up with this pollutant in the air. There were great fogs reported. They would bring these scythes, and then they'd have this fog that would occur. And wherever the pail of the air would go, everyone would die. And there are reports that people would see the fog, the black air, the smoke. Maybe it was a smoke, a burner that left a pall of deadly air. That's what they called it. They tried smelling herbs and keeping the bad air out of their house and using herbs in their house to make it smell better. They knew that the air was poison, but they didn't know how to get rid of it. Many of them fled. But basically, they wiped out all of Europe because the people of Europe, were followers of Jesus Christ. And they eradicated their teachings. All we know now is that we have these inquisitions that are spun like, oh, they were heretics, that's why they had to be killed. No, they were actually the true Christians. But this has been going on for a long time, and everybody is just, well, we used to read about it, but never really have it in our face all the time. You know, we heard as Christians about how the Catholics murdered everybody, but nobody in our Sunday school class in Protestant times and in modern times ever said, oh, how evil these Catholics were. They just said, oh, yeah, we had to because the heretics were trying to take over Christianity. We were trying to get rid of paganism, right? And then, of course, at some point, the Pope went too far and we had to say, oh, we're protesting. But their protests were very weak at that point. They should have said, no, you all need to be tried for murder. This entire institution is evil. We got to get rid of it. Well, maybe they did at the beginning. Maybe there were wars between Protestants and Christians. But it's just like today. You can protest, you can get mad, but there's so much subterfuge, so many lies. When people would say, oh, it's these people, these Jesuit priests that are killing us, they would just say, no, it didn't. Nanny, nanny, nanny. And what? Screw you. We're going to kill you. You can go take your stories with you. They become fairy tales. We hear about all this stuff. And now modern people look back and say, oh, these superstitious Christians thought they were being killed by the Jesuits. Ha ha ha. They thought they saw Grim Reapers. What's that? A priest with a black robe. He came to town and you were all dead. Oh, well, no. Scientists today say it was probably some contaminated flea that was on the back of a contaminated sick rat. Isn't it interesting that we hear about all these things like this, these plagues? We just went through one, right? You a little suspicious about that one? Well, I imagine they were a little suspicious about these other ones. You know, the Spanish sent Cordova over to, I don't know, South America, and went up through there and all the way up through Mexico and into America, and everywhere he went, all those poor people were gone. Within 100 years, their cities crumbled, and then they came over in their colonization and mopped up. But when Cordoba came over here, this was way before Columbus, there were people here, and there were cities here. But when Columbus finally came over, they were pretty much gone. By the time, the Constitution and America, all we saw was these refugees living in tents. Yeah, it's a little peculiar, a little bit coinky-dinky that we're told that the natives would get these gifts like blankets, and then the next day the whole village was gone. Huh? Yeah, where did we get the idea of scalping? This was a practice of the people from Spain upon the natives. Then they blamed the natives for doing it. Well, they were just retaliating. At the last, they finally started fighting back. But every time these things happen, it's funny. We go for hundreds of years in some locations. People don't die. People don't get plagues. They don't just like, oh, look at all the rats are coming in. And everybody's dying of rat, flu or something. Or maybe it's a bird flu or a pig flu, like the swine flu. Oh, it's some kind of flu. One flew over the cuckoo nest. I don't know. But it just happens conveniently when we got to get rid of a bunch of people. And the stories say that it's pretty unusual. We see lights in the sky, and then boom, we get fog. We see Jesuit priests come into town with a sigh and a whoosh sound, and then the next day the whole town's dead. But hey, it's probably just some flea. A flea that got off the boat from China that was sucking on some pig over there they had a pandemic over there. We don't know why. But now it's come over here. We don't know why. I don't know. I think it's probably a little simpler than that. Where'd the rats come from? Just all of a sudden and just killed only Cathars, only killed Christians. Well, how convenient to mop up for these Jesuits after they took them to the piles and burned them on stakes and drove them out by the sword. When they couldn't get the rest of them, this convenient little black fog that swept through town, and they all died. Isn't that interesting? And so people started doing penance, thinking they had become sinners. They had to repent, or else they'd come and kill you some more. So it says, whatever it was, this disease, it had dreadful effects on the body. The classical symptom was a growth the size of a nut or an apple in the armpit. Go down where it says, most people believe that the Black Death was caused by poisons or by corrupted air that carried the disease from place to place. They sought to keep poisons from entering the body by smelling or ingesting strong-smelling herbs, and they tried to remove the poisons through bloodletting. Here's another superstition that the physicians and doctors at the time had. Come on down, we'll heal you. We'll just cut your arm open and let you die by draining your blood. At the last minute, we'll try to stop the blood from draining, and that somehow will get rid of all these demons out of this. It's in your blood or something. So ridiculous. They put leeches on you and suck your body. All your body would be full of leeches, and you'd have to endure all these blood sucking leeches for however long they decided, and then they'd come and take them off, and that would be some kind of a cure. It was just a way to torture people or experiment on them. You can tell that they were all superstitious. One of the things that they were always saying is that these Judeans were responsible. And today they're like, oh, superstitious people. Why would they think that? So they also prayed and did penance. Anxiety and fears about the plague caused people to look for scapegoats. And they found them in a particular group of people who they believed had poisoned the wells of Christian communities and thereby infected the drinking water. The charge led to the murder of thousands of these individuals across Europe. Because population figures for the period before the arrival of the plague do not exist for most countries and cities, only educated guesses can be made about mortality rates. Of the total English population of perhaps 4.2 million, probably 1.4 million died of the Black Death in its several visits. In Italy, densely populated cities rendered incredible losses. Florence lost between 1/2 and 2/3 of the population when the plague visited in 1348. The disease reoccurred intermittently in the 1360s, 1370s, and reappeared many times, as late as the early 1700s in Europe. It still continues to infect rodent and human populations sporadically today. So, there's a lot they're not telling us. It's in the past. It's part of the operations and programs they've had for us in the past. And it's always to destroy Christianity. And so there's going to be truths that you hear, but those are going to turn into conspiracies that people laugh at, and doctors are going to tell you you're a fool to believe in. But the rumors then are the same rumors that I will spout and proclaim from the housetop today, that there is a group of individuals in this world that are trying to kill all Christians and wipe them off the face of the earth. They tried killing them. Then they tried disease. Then economic famines. And now they realize the only way to get to us is to destroy our soul, is to put the light out within us. Go within us into the paradise where the Almighty, the divine mind is, that's radiating from the tree of life, and somehow deceive that mind by consciousness, by pain, suffering, MK Ultra mind control. You control people by suffering, and through suffering they forget, and they become docile and scared, and they are controllable, and then you can lead them down into a pit. But they're focusing more now on leading your spirit into a trap. It's more than your body. They can lure your body into pleasures, sex, all kinds of technological pleasures like games and stimulation, drinking and drugs. Get you to a compromised position, and then feed into your soul beliefs and fears. And beliefs are important because beliefs can be like checkmate. When they've got you to the point where you believe that there is no hope, that life itself is a prison and it's just a death trap, that you cannot pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And that's bad But it's worse. If they can put guilt on you, they can make you believe that you're unworthy, then you will go into a shell and you may not come out for a long, long time. The only cure for mankind is for somehow the Lord to enlighten our minds from this deception, at least some of us, and then remove this classroom and this civilization, start a new kingdom that could last for 1,000 years, where the truth was being told from a certain high point, meaning it's symbolic of get up on a high enough mountain so that the truth can be seen worldwide. Let your light shine. During that 1,000 years, 144,000 kings and priests will reign upon this earth, upon thrones, not like the old inquisitors on actual thrones. But these individuals will have love. They will be the servants, the shepherds, to guide the animals into a world of peace. The nature of this world, the animal nature within us, needs to be changed, transformed by feeding them and loving them and caring for them, by the balance. So once that 1,000 year begins with righteous heirs on the throne, teaching through love in the proper channel of teaching, in the proper organization created by our Heavenly Father, which is the family, the elders. You learn from your elders, your brothers, your sisters. We're all brothers and sisters. It's different than buying and selling the earth and punishing and an eye for an eye and tooth for tooth. We're gone to another covenant where it's given you shall receive, love. And we're going to have 1,000 years of that in order to restore the earth to its original paradise. And when Jesus arrives and he sees them abusing us, the hard taskmaster, the hired hand, it says he will take away what they have and give it to us, give us the resources of the world so that we can finally enjoy life. But woe unto them, those unfaithful stewards. It'd been better for them if they had never been born. But this is what's been going on. And so what is this dark fog covering the East Coast or something, places in here in the United States? And is it affecting other places in the world? Let's look. It's not really making the news that much. We're hearing about the orbs and what we talked about yesterday, but I just put the fog spreading in the USA. That's all I put in the Goggle Brothers browser search engine. And they come up, a dense fog has enveloped large parts of the United States, disrupting travel and sparking conspiracy theories. The occurrence, referred to as Fogvid-24, has allegedly induced cold and flu-like symptoms in hundreds of individuals exposed to the fog. Huh? Reports show that the fog has impacted air travel, rail systems, and highways in multiple areas, as reported by Sportskita. You know, it says that one of the areas affected is Florida and Texas, Midwest, California. They talk about it's going on in the UK too, but you know, that's Florida. That's where they just got wiped out by several hurricanes. And now they're getting this, you know, Florida and Texas are conservatives, right? So if you slam them with some hurricanes and only a few thousand die, and you've gotten rid of their houses in many communities and they're being, you know, they were flooded, they've got mold. People are trying to fix their houses and air them out. Well, then to come through a month or two later with a fog, a dense fog that will give them all the flu. Now, we don't know where this is going to end up. Do they just start off with the flu and end up with something worse later? But it's right there in that area, Florida and Texas, where they got hit with all these hurricanes. And now they're coming back all of a sudden, quinkly-dinkly, with a fog that's making people sick. It's so dense, they're shutting down airports and roads. Isn't it a little bit like the 1100, the 12th century, when they were murdering all these Christians? And then the next century, they go in and mop up with some kind of poison air? I'm just saying. Reports show that the fog has impacted air travel, rail systems, highways in multiple areas, as reported by Sportskeeda. Major airports in both the UK and the US have experienced considerable delays and cancellations. Heathrow, Luton, Manchester airports in the UK experienced major disruptions resulting from low visibility in the United States. Impacted regions consist of California, Texas, Florida, and sections of the Midwest. All conservative areas, right? A lot of California is conservative, even though, southern, like certain cities, big major cities, are very liberal. But there's viral conspiracy theories. Online, the fog has fueled conspiracy theories. Some claim it is a chemical mist, not a natural phenomenon. Videos and images on platforms like X show users allegedly attributing symptoms such as fever, fatigue, sore throat to exposure. Sportskeeda notes that the term FogVid24 mirrors Vid-19 due to alleged symptom similarities. Wow, she's got some apps, don't she? I guess she just takes a spoonful of that stuff and voila.
In front of the camera, lights off into the distance, but that's because the entire area is under a dense fog advisory. It'll take us to 10 a.m. Widespread fog has been seen throughout the area, dropping visibility to a quarter of a mile or less. Make sure you're slowing down and giving yourself plenty of space on the roads, especially if you're heading out early. Here's what visibility looks like across the area. We are under half a mile in Freeport, Monroe, DeKalb, just under a mile throughout places like Rockford and Rochelle. So make sure you keep that in mind earlier on.
Well, anyway, guys, it's just pretty odd. A lot of odd things going on. Maybe it's just fog, but keep an eye out. Pray to the Lord. Preach the gospel. Be prepared. Something's going down. We'll see you tomorrow, guys. Have a good one.